Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download a free PDF copy of issue number 8 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine or order a beautiful printed copy. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be exploring the physiology and psychology of non-human intelligent beings. My guest is Whitley Strieber, author of more than 40 books, including many well-known horror and science fiction novels, such as Wolfen. There are also a number of best-selling non-fiction books, including Communion, A True Story, Breakthrough, The Next Step, Solving the Communion Enigma, What is to Come, The Key, A True Encounter, The Secret School, Preparation for Contact, Transformation, The Breakthrough, Them. He is also co-author with Aunt Strieber of The Communion Letters, The Truth is Out There for Those Who Dare to Read It, and The Afterlife Revolution. Additionally, he is co-author with Jeffrey Kripal of The Supernatural, A New Vision of the Unexplained. He also wrote the foreword for Jacques Vallée's book, Dimensions, a case book of alien contact. His newest book, which we'll be focusing on today, is The Fourth Mind. Whitley is in Southern California in the Los Angeles area, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Whitley. It's a pleasure to be with you once again.
Well, Jeff, it's always a pleasure to be here, and I'm so glad. I'm looking forward to our time together very much.
Well, I'm very impressed with the fact that our mutual friend Jeffrey Kripal thinks your newest book is probably your best book yet. And I'm inclined to agree with him because you are paving new ground in a way that hasn't ever been done before, to my knowledge, actually getting down to the nitty-gritty details of the physiology of these non-human intelligences whom you've been interacting with now for decades.
No, that's right. And it's a surprising thing that, I have been interacting with them, and I wish I could say that, gosh, I've got video and photographs and us walking together in the woods and all of that. But in all of this time, I was just reflecting this morning, I don't have one single piece of physical evidence. And the reason is actually this. The physical experiences of physical contact have been few and far between. They've been very telling, and it's almost as if it's a kind of sentence that they have been writing in my life very carefully with, one word here and one word there. And what happened with the new book was a biologist put a document on Reddit, which someone sent to me. I must say I don't go on Reddit very much. Not that I don't like Reddit. I'm perfectly happy with Reddit. Just have a busy life. Suddenly, when I read the document, what jumped out at me was something in it that only I know from personal observation. No one else has ever written about it, and believe me, I studied this literature very carefully. And I thought, my God, he knows. This biologist is the real deal. And as I combed through the document, I realized that my life experience with the visitors, as I call them, coincides with the statements in the document in detail. It was remarkable. And that's the first half of the book.
Why did you name it The Fourth Mind?
We have three minds: instinctive, emotional, and intellectual. I'm simplifying here, obviously, but those of us who know the more esoteric terminology can put it together, because this is essentially the way the structure works. There is, however, something else, a fourth level. And that fourth level is apparently in some way emerging out of balance between the other three. And that is where we need to go if we're going to survive as a species and become a new mankind. And our planet is telling us you'd better do that, or your ship's going to sink. Mm-hmm. So that's what the book is about the visitors and how they have that, and what that means, and what the spiritual significance of it is, why we don't have it, and to an extent, how we can regain it.
I like the word regain. It implies that this is a capacity that we once had and somehow we lost it.
Well, exactly. I think that's the case. And of course, there are many stories of a war in space. And those stories are very ancient. However, they coincide, I think, with a natural event that would have looked like that. It would have looked like a war between the gods. And let me outline how it works. 30,000 years ago, there is evidence that Earth was struck by gamma rays, probably almost certainly from an exploding star, a star that had gone supernova, and it was within a few, maybe 50 or 100 light years at most away. In other words, enough to send to a significant amount of gamma radiation into the atmosphere. At that same time, the reason that is believed to be true, on a strip of the Earth from Southeast Asia across Australia, there was a mass extinction of all large ungulates, large animals. These were animals that lived outdoors all the time. They didn't shelter anywhere. Animals that sheltered were less affected, and especially animals that came out during the night, which, if you look into the marsupials of Australia, you will find that, with a few exceptions, they are mostly night dwellers now. The kangaroos being a notable exception. But they probably were so numerous that they didn't entirely die out and proliferated again very rapidly. Something killed those animals, and it was almost certainly gamma ray radiation from this supernova. And there is a tribe on Taiwan who has a story that goes back to that era. And in the book, one of the things we always assume is that myths and so forth are fairly recent, maybe a few thousand years old. I show in the book where there are some stories that go back many, many more years than that, such as this myth of the two sons among the people of this tribe in Taiwan. They saw this happen. Now, fast forward to 12,000 years ago. Every supernova expels an enormous amount of physical debris in the form of metals and all kinds of other things that go flying out into the cosmos in every direction when it explodes. But it moves much more slowly than gamma rays. 12,000 years ago, very suddenly and completely unexpectedly, this debris arrived in our solar system. As an aside, we live in an area called the local bubble. It is a bubble of stars that have a bad habit of going supernova. And there are lots of supernovas in our neighborhood, an exceptionally large number of them compared to the rest of the Milky Way galaxy. So that had happened, and it happens reasonably frequently. Betelgeuse is probably going to go supernova in the next few hundred years, or could go tomorrow, actually. In any case, this debris arrived at ultra-high velocity and penetrated the atmosphere of planet Earth. It immediately destroyed large numbers of large ungulates which were outdoors across the Americas, just as the gamma rays had hit Australia and Southeast Asia. This is why you find the bodies of mammoths that were in areas that remained cold preserved with food still in their mouths. They weren't quick frozen. They were killed by micrometeorites. And the bits of meteoric iron can be found embedded in their bones. They literally were sheeted with micrometeorites and just dropped dead on the spot while they were eating their dinner. This continued in various phases for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. This initially brought on a fire that spread across most of North America and is memorialized in a geologic feature called the Black Mat, which consists of algae and carbon from the wood the carbonized wood that floated on a flood that followed this initial event. So that's pretty much where the book is now. Why do I talk about all of that catastrophe? We started, I think, before the catastrophe with the same powers the visitors had. There's ample evidence. It's admittedly not completely convincing, and it's a little sketchy in places, obviously, that we did have these powers in the distant past. But what then happened was, among other things, when the glacier, the second Dryas, the younger Dryas occurred, the glaciers collapsed very rapidly, and sea levels rose 400 feet in a matter of days. It was that catastrophic. We did not have, people always think of Atlantis as being some kind of grand city, but we had something along the coastlines of the planet. I don't think it was a huge cities or anything like that, but we also had these extraordinary capabilities. All of those people were killed overnight. And the ones left in the highlands were left to struggle on their own in a world that had gone mad. And that's where we are now. We are still living in a state of traumatic amnesia from those days.
Well, that's a very stark picture of the human race, and it's certainly worth pondering seriously. I'd like to go back, however, to the document that was posted on Reddit, because it seems as if there are two halves to the story, and I know your book has two very distinct halves. I understand you posted that document in full as an appendix to your book, and I'm very grateful that you did that. I'm under the impression that the author of the document was anonymous, but he seems to have been interacting with people who posted questions to him on Reddit.
I don't know. I have no idea who he was, and I didn't post any questions to him. I didn't really feel the need to, because I had a sufficient amount of information in my own head to use the document reflectively in the book, which is what I did. And I'm not real sure what his status is, but it couldn't have been, what he did couldn't have been appreciated by whoever keeps these secrets. So I just stayed away from that. All I know is the document was on Reddit. I have no idea about anything else.
Well, the author of the document purports to be a biologist of some sort who was asked to perform autopsies on alien bodies that were in the possession of contractors who had some sort of an arrangement, I suppose, with what is now being called the program.
Well, years ago, I had received information, I think from Stanton Friedman. We talked about this. I don't think we talked about it on the air, but he wouldn't tell me his source, but he said that there were bodies at Fort Detrick. My Uncle Mickey was at Wright Field in the Air Materiel Command when the debris from Roswell and the bodies were brought in. He never mentioned the bodies to me, but his close friend, Arthur Exon, who was also at Air Materiel at that time, or whether they were attached to the command, I don't know, but they certainly knew a great deal about this material that had been brought in, said that the bodies were insect-like. He told one of my relatives that he had held one of them in his arms. He did not say that to me. But, and then, of course, General Twining, who was the head of Air Materiel at that time, said to his son, according to his son, that there had not only been bodies, but one that was alive, and who had told him that they had no interest in human beings. In other words, the first lie is the first thing that was said. There are a lot of people in this field now who are trying to lessen the ontological shock that's going to be involved and is involved by making it out to be something quite different from what it is, trying to fold it into our own religious traditions, which is what we've been doing from time immemorial. That's not going to work. In any case, I knew about the body. And when I saw this, and I saw Fort Detrick was specifically mentioned, and it had been mentioned to me by Stan that they were there, I thought to myself, yeah, this is further authentication for me, because I don't recall Stan ever mentioning it in any book of his. In fact, I looked and couldn't find a thing. And we just talked about it, and I never put it in anything of mine either.
But surely, if the U.S. military or one of its contractors were in possession of any sort of biological material, which is now widely claimed, of course they would call in experts to examine that material and analyze it.
Yes, and the expert that wrote that document had a knowledge level consistent with an active biologist who was up on his discipline in the early 2000s. And he says that essentially that it was in the early 2000s that this work was done. And as I point out a couple of times in the book, there are other things that could now be done and probably are still being done. Why wouldn't they still be working on it? When I learned about the metal that was understudy in the it's from the 1950s on, the metal that was brought to Roswell ended up under study by metallurgists. And one of them told me that this metal, as we had developed more and more sensitive equipment and better microscopes, we learned more and more about the metal. And this is undoubtedly true of these devices as well. I mean, of these beings as well, bodies. I think of them as devices because they're non-reproducing and therefore they are manufactured. They're not natural. A mule is natural and non-reproducing, but these these creatures don't even have vestiges of sexual organs. So there's other evidence in their bodies that's described that indicate that they have been created, not born. So I would assume that we have more sophisticated knowledge about their bodies and genetics and anatomy now than we did when he was writing the document.
Well, one of the striking features that you focus on are the eyes. And I know, of course, in the cover of your new book, you have portrayed the eyes very differently than they were portrayed in the classic picture that appeared in Communion.
Yes. I have a few friends in the close encounter community who have said that they have seen them without the black eye coverings. And when I hear that talked about, I always come to a vague memory of my own that might be of this, but I can't be sure. But it is specifically stated in the document that these are eye coverings. And I go into the eyes in great detail in the document, analyzing the probable different functionalities these eyes possess, different from our own. Because, of course, this is one of the major sensory inputs that anyone possesses, and especially them, because their eyes are their most important sensory input. They're large, and they can see a very wide spectrum of different lights and light emanations. So I took the lenses off the eyes for the book cover because it's time for us to look directly into those eyes. It's time for us to do that. My whole life is about dissipating ontological shock, dissipating the shock of the new. It's going to be very hard to do, very, very much harder. As I say in the book somewhere, it's easy to say, of course, we're ready. We can do it. But no, we can't. We don't know what it is yet. And until we do know what it is, we cannot say that. We're not ready. And I want to help us get ready because the closer the planet comes to being non-viable, the closer the visitors are going to come to us. And as I understand it, when virtually every single one of us knows that this planet can no longer support us, is when they will come. Now, that is going to be a shock every bit as profound or more profound than the shock that happened 12,000 years ago when the sky exploded. So there we have it.
Let's dig deeper, if we can, into their physiology. You mentioned they don't have organs of reproduction, and I gather you do describe sounds that they make, but I gather they don't have speech normally the way we do.
They do not have a vocal cords or a syrinx. I didn't need the document to tell me that. I've been with them and I've heard them make sounds, and those sounds are not made with vocal cords or a syrinx. They're made from the diaphragm. They're cries like, oh, like that. But this is not their means of communication. These people are a non-vocal species. They are telepathic by nature. They have and I hate this phrase, hive mind. It's so dismissive. Talk about, we're the ones in danger of being colonized. But when we say that to them, we're about them. We're colonizing them with our own assumptions. The truth is this: each one of them, not the little short ones that we autopsied, but the taller, more ones that have genital sexual organs, are very viable individuals. But they have a linked mind. Essentially, there's only one mind there. And it is links together probably millions of individuals, and meaning it is a far more complex entity than any one of those individuals can master. In other words, nobody fully masters their whole mind any more than we do. The difference being that theirs is much bigger. And they come to us from the standpoint of individual personalities who are operating within the context of a gigantic group mind that is rich, complex, very much emotionally finished, and extremely, I don't want to go down this road too far, but it's possible for a human being to experience that mind, at least a little bit. And it is very quiet, and you can tell immediately they don't have things like wars, because how could they have a war? How could you have a war with yourself? But they do have, the personality is amazingly complex and filled with all kinds of things that we would consider abnormalities, but which they have accepted as part of themselves. So it's quite different from us.
You describe a moment, and I've heard Jeffrey Kripal describe the same moment. I think it occurred at the Esalen Institute when you were sharing a room with him, when in the middle of the night, he was awakened, I think, with an awareness of their consciousness, and it terrified him.
Yes, and I can explain exactly why. That was a period when they were still coming to me physically every night to wake me up for a Brahma Muhurta time, which is an hour and a half before dawn, when the mind is most open. And they would physically wake me up by touching my arm, or all kinds of ways. Some of them rather scary, others, most of them quite fun. A little dry kiss would happen. Sometimes they would tweak my nose, shake one of my nipples, all kinds of things, make a school bell go off in the living room. It was really, really fun. And that happened, that went on for years. And just recently, just last year is when it stopped. Now it's up to me to wake up. But if I don't, and it's not exactly 3 a.m., so I can't put on an alarm, it's an hour and a half before dawn, changes a little every day. If I don't wake myself up for a night or two, then they do come and wake me up, but it's not so pleasant anymore because I'm not a student anymore. I'm a participant. And if I fail, it's regarded as the failure of a participant, not as the failure of a student. Anyway, so they were coming. And at Esalen, we stay in the Murphy House, which is off to itself a bit and right on the cliff that overlooks the Pacific. And there are a couple of rooms that have direct access to the outdoors and to the Pacific. And one of them, which is the one I was staying in and stay in when I'm there generally, you can actually walk out the door across a little deck and walk out onto the lawn, and then a few feet away, you're right on the cliff's edge. An ideal place for them to come in physically, because they will come up from underwater and then come immediately across just in the air for a few seconds. The same thing applies here where I live. They're very close here as well, and that's why I'm here. In any case, so that happened that night, and they woke me up by banging on my shoulder. We had a brief exchange. I did this sitting that I do with them, and I went back to bed, and Jeff was sleeping in the other bed in the room, and I thought to myself, he's going to have an interesting experience sooner or later. And that's when it happened to him a few minutes later. And he expresses it, and he talks about it and discusses it in one of his books. He experienced what sounded to him like glass breaking inside his mind, a vast amount of glass breaking. Then he heard his own voice cry out from within him, "Oh my God." And this was why he was experiencing ontological shock, the shock of the new. But to be exactly precise about the shock he was experiencing, it was this: we live in the stream of time. Everything for us is always new. They live on the shores because of their long experience of being, and they are watching the stream of time from the outside. They have knowledge of the future and the knowledge of the past that goes back and is incredibly complex and rich. What they do not have is a sense of the new. And Jeff, when you're taken into their region, you lose your sense of the new, and suddenly everything becomes expected. And the whole reason you are here alive is challenged. It is a fear worse, much worse, believe me, than death. And Jeff came to that fear at that moment when they drew near him. And that's why he felt like his world was collapsing, and why the voice from deep within, the voice of his soul itself, cried out for God, because he was afraid. He was like a little fish being caught and pulled out of the water. And what in the world is this now? They're here because mankind is about to be pulled out of the water, and they are both fishermen and midwives.
So it is this experience of being out of the water, out of this three-dimensional world, or for four dimensions if you add time, that we conceive ourselves to be in effect trapped in. They can look at it from outside, and that, I think, is what you mean by the fourth mind.
Yes. In the third mind, the third mind is inside the stream of time. The fourth mind is outside of the stream of time and the other three dimensions, essentially. And that is where we are going, like it or not. And it has great facility, because you then begin to be able to know the future with a significant amount of accuracy, but bearing in mind that it's not completely fixed. A lot of it is fixed. Enough is fixed so that a human being in the state most of us are in now is going to feel very threatened by that, because it's going to feel as if their reason for being alive is being destroyed, and they're going to end up feeling as if they're dead and alive at the same time. And that's going to be that when people say that, I'm not feeling ontological shock anymore, I'm feeling ontological relief, that means they don't understand what kind of shock they're going to be dealing with. Because most of us, except for a very few, have not experienced this shock yet. But you can live with it, because I have lived with it. I've lived with it for years. And I purposely don't look into the future, because if I did that, then I would be betraying myself. So I don't do that. And it's not that I could. They showed me once that experience. And it was suddenly as if for about 30 seconds, my life was riding on rails. It was horrible. I had no life. But then I was back into the stream of time, and everything was new again. How will we live with this? This is a great unanswered question. How will we live outside of the stream of time? But if we can't go there, we're not going to be able to manage the future of the species. We have to go there.
I believe you suggest in your book that they value us because we are capable of experiencing the world freshly, moment by moment, that they don't have that experience and they would like to have it.
They have it with me every night. That's communion. They come in and they share my life with me. And they share and lots of them do. It's not one, it's many, and many different ones. And they do this with lots of experiencers. People can learn to do this. And it's not, they don't steal your soul or anything. Why would they do that? That's what they want to share. If they took it from you, then there would be nothing to share anymore. So that sharing does take place. Where they ended up is a different place from where we want to go. They ended up, for why I'm not sure I could explain, completely separated from the time stream and looking in it from the outside. And it's a desperate place to be, because they are like that 30 seconds I just described all the time. They have no past, present, and future. It's all now to them. And for us, that's an extraordinarily high spiritual state. But for them, it's a trap, because they live in it too completely. The most advanced spiritual seeker on the planet can get into that state, but still have his or her feet firmly in the ground of time. And that is the second part of why they want so badly to have relationship with us. They made their mistake. They want to reground themselves in time. And they see us as a species that can stand with our feet in time and our heads in the timeless wonder of reality, and that they are not going to be leaving because they want this to work.
Well, that is a beautiful, inspiring statement. But if I were to jump around a little bit, if you'll forgive me, you also write about excrement. And I think that's actually kind of important, that their way of excreting toxins from their own organism is very different than ours.
Yes. Well, their organisms are not, remember, their organisms are essentially devices designed they're a sufficient density to enable them to be fixed in the time stream. The reason we have so little contact with our own dead is that only the most spiritually advanced of us can reconnect with the time stream after we die. It's easy for a few days, but then the soul begins to rise toward the west wind, hearing secret harmonies, as Anthony Poole says in one of his books of the Dance to the Music of Time. It releases its place in time entirely. Now, they have a technology that enables them to come back into the time stream. That is, these bodies. But they bring with them their knowledge of the timeless world, of the timelessness of the world. This is why it is so challenging, whether they are wearing the eye coverings or not, to look into their eyes, because we feel that they are seeing our entire span, not just a life, but our entire span from the beginning to the end. That's what they're actually seeing, and we feel that. We feel that. You know, many dogs, which are sensitive creatures, if you force a dog to look into your eyes and you won't take your eyes from him, after a while he will become very uncomfortable. He will begin to cry. Many of them, not all. Some of them are too happy, some of them are too dumb. But the average dog will react this way. They will this is because they are seeing what we know, which is the inevitability of death, which they do not know. That's not part of their being. And they don't know what they're seeing, but they know it's very terrifying. And their eyes, to them, our eyes are very dark, just as the visitor's eyes are to us. So how do we learn to live with that? One thing that you have to take into this and that nobody understands at all is a sense of humor. My wife said, no sense of humor, no spiritual development. Mm. And she was a master, boy. She knew what she was. And there could be nothing more true than that. If we can do that, if we can bring laughter into this, we will succeed. We will succeed in living in two worlds at the same time. And that's what we were built to do. We can be in their world and in our own world, both at the same time, in the time stream and out of the time stream. And I mentioned in the book, Know Thyself from Delphi. You can't do that without laughter. So you learn yourself, and the more you learn yourself, the easier it is to be outside of the time stream, and the easier it is to look them in the eye.
Well, it seems as if you're suggesting that when they manifest in a physical form, it's almost like they're putting on a diving suit or something to go underwater. That this is not who they are.
Yes, it's not who they are. And who they are is, these people are at the same vibration or the same frequency as our own dead are, for the most part, I think. I have seen one time a drawer being pulled open, and it looked like there were dead bodies in it of them, and their faces were all funny, and their mouths were little like this, and they were not animated. And suddenly, and quite disturbingly, they started to become animated and come up out of the drawer. And I thought, holy God, now what? And where am I? And then I don't remember much of this one of these experiences that's kind of been edited. I remember walking up a long curving hallway before I saw that, but that's all I remember of it. I don't remember leaving, but I'm quite sure it was a physical experience. In any case, what I was seeing, now I know, at the time I did not, was them entering and animating their bodies, which I think are tailor-made to them. This is why when our military people shoot them down, it annoys them because, I mean, they're losing something that obviously is of value, but it doesn't infuriate them and it doesn't kill them in the same way we would be feeling killed by that, because they can always do it again if they want. They can get another body. And not only that, they've got at least two kinds of bodies and probably more. There are some that are about 5 feet tall and they have genitals. I don't know the males, but I do know the females, and they do definitely have genitals. The little short ones don't have genitals. They don't reproduce. So they are like avatars. And the lady on the cover of Communion once referred to them as the good army. And they're like, she'd come up with alone, but she also has 3 or 4 of them with her. Mm. And at the time, I thought they were like her children. Now I know that they were basically robotic and under her control, but they had these large brains so that she could fully engage with them. And in other words, they were like extensions of her. They must have been like that. Very interesting, because the brain and the being are two different things, and they know that, and they live with that. For them, these shorter beings might have a huge brain, but that doesn't mean that they were independent individuals. They were part of her.
Well, you seem to be suggesting that in terms of the biologics that may be in the possession of the U.S. government or its contractors, that these are, in effect, these robotic entities, and the ones who have sexual organs and can reproduce and were apparently born in a manner similar to other creatures being born and have parents, that those entities are not the ones that are in possession of the government or its contractors.
I would be surprised, and it's not impossible that they've been shot down, but I would be rather surprised if that happened. And I do think that would be considered extremely hostile. The government people who are shooting them down don't fully understand what's happening. They call themselves psionics operators, and they can call them in, and it's so exciting. And then they can shoot them down. We're in control of the situation. We can call them in, shoot them down anytime we want to. They are in a training program that they don't know is a training program. This is a big universe. It has 21.6 sextillion planets in it. And not all of the entities on those planets are interested in things like bringing us along. And there's all kinds of things out there. And they told me, and I report this in one of my previous books, A New World, they told me that we have to know how to defend ourselves. This is a teaching process. They're teaching us how to defend ourselves by sending in these orbs and letting us shoot them. It's like skeet shooting. This will get harder. They will up the ante and make it more challenging and more dangerous over time.
Yeah, that would suggest, and of course the literature is full of this, different species, supposedly very different, reptilians, mantids, greys, Nordics, that have very different origins, very different, I would assume, consciousness.
Of course, they have different sensory organs. Their sensory input is different, and their brains are different. And the result is their experience of reality is different. We live on a planet full of other animals, and we can't talk to any of them. We can painstakingly teach a dog or perhaps a cat or a few other animals how to respond to certain words. But we cannot understand their languages at all. We can't understand what dogs are saying, what cats are saying, what dolphins are saying, or elephants. Not at all. Not at all. And we have grown up on this planet side by side with all of them, especially the cats and dogs. And these beings are from a completely different ideation of reality. So we can't expect it to be the same. And one of the many ways of dividing cultures in this universe must be between cultures that have evolved with voiced species and cultures that have evolved with unvoiced species. A little while ago, I talked about a brief taste of what it was like to be in the unvoiced world. And it's very, very different from this. You will not find things like art because there's no one to show it to. There's no impetus. If you're making a painting, you're showing it to yourself. It's for you, only you. So for one of them to see it is for all of them to see it. And that's another reason they're fascinated by us. They don't understand things like that. They're fascinated by this amazing proliferation of individuals on this planet. It's an absolutely remarkable phenomenon to them. And another thing I learned from them, voiced species are rare because they don't last long. They argue and fight and blow themselves up all the time, apparently. And we're no exception. But because of things about us and our brains that are apparently rather unique, they really want us to survive because we can live in both worlds at the same time. We can live in the world inside the stream of time and outside of it at the same time. And our great teachers have all been talking about this. You can't really get deeply into Zen until you can know how to do this. If you once you understand, student of enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Enlightened person, chop wood, carry water. Then you know what it means to live inside and outside time at the same time. And viewers are saying, what did he mean? It's a Zen story. That's the whole point. What did it mean? But you can be in front of it as a human being. And being in front of it, you touch the edge of time.
Well, I couldn't help but notice from our previous conversations that you have an extensive background with the Gurdjieff work. It's also sometimes referred to as the fourth way. Would you say there's a connection between the fourth way and the fourth mind?
Well, I have a very fraught relationship with the Gurdjieff Foundation. And anyone who's interested, by the way, can easily go to gurdjiefffoundation.org. I am not a member of the Gurdjieff Foundation, and I am not a practitioner of the Gurdjieff work, and I do not teach the work. I do know the work. I know the work very well. I was in the work for 60 years, and I've been out of the work before, and probably will in it again sooner or later if I live long enough. But there are profound connections. The main one is the sensing exercise. When Anne and I started in the work in 1969, we started with William Siegel and Joseph Stein. In any case, the sensing exercise is taught at the beginning of when you go into the work, and it is a matter of taking hold of your attention. Our attention is designed to go outside into the world around us. It will go wherever it is called. Someone claps their hands, and your attention goes to the hands immediately. But you can save some of your attention for yourself. And you do that by learning to anchor it in your body. That's what the sensing exercise is about. You take your attention and you methodically move it through your body. And then part of your attention is in your physical body. And you can open your third eye, too, you'll find, when you do that. Just by sort of looking up, you see the old pictures of the Buddhas or the various gurus kind of looking up into their foreheads. That's they're opening their third eyes. So I was doing the exercise every night at 11, and I had been doing it from 1969. At some point when we moved in 1983 to this country cabin, and we're going there on weekends. It was a summer place and a weekend place. We're going there on weekends and in the summer, and I was doing the exercise. The visitor said to me, I asked them finally one time, why did you come here? And the answer was, we saw a glow. And I thought, the glow of cities, of course. That's where I was in my thinking at that time. Years later, Annie passes away. And I'm grief-stricken, of course, because she was the light of my life. I lived with an enlightened being who would have slapped me around if I'd ever told anybody else that while she still had slappers attached to her. In any case, she came back shortly after. I was traveling a lot after it happened because staying here in the flat was difficult. So I was traveling, and I traveled to a William Henry meeting in Nashville. And during the break, a lady came up to me and said, Mr. Strieber, I have something that happened to me that's very strange, and I don't know whether I should tell you. I said, you don't have to worry about telling me strange things. I'm there already. So she said, I just heard your wife's voice. She knew Anne's voice, of course, from the radio. Say in my ear, tell Whitley I can see him when he's sitting in the chair. And I thought, my God, It's the sensing exercise, not the glow of cities. I thought it immediately. And that explains why they came. It wasn't the glow of cities, and they weren't talking about the planet. They were talking about my cabin. They saw this one little glow in this cabin in the great big forest every night, and they came to investigate. And they reconnected with me because they had been with me when I was a child, and there was this kind of a reunion for them. I didn't know it, though, and so I got all upset when they showed themselves physically, and we had quite a kerfluffle, as described in communion. But anyway, since then, I learned to do the exercise and to open myself not only to them, but to my body, not only to the visitors, but to a whole world, including my wife and all kinds of different levels of this, because believe me, the human part of this is huge. It's not just us versus aliens. It is a whole nother world that we are a tiny part of. We're a little tiny part of it, locked up here in these physical bodies, going through the time stream as students in a school and having what is actually a wonderful experience. Every single human being who gets to live a life is the luckiest of the lucky. Believe me.
I concur with that.
I know you do. I can see it in your face.
Let me ask another question, if I can jump around a bit. The description from the biologist who reported on Reddit makes them seem very, very physical. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure you and others seem to suggest they can walk through walls and do things that physical beings normally cannot do. And I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, that's a big question. Instead of walk through walls, let's talk about something more down to earth. Levitation.
Very down to earth, yeah.
In the book, I discuss levitation extensively. There is a wonderful book called They Flew about medieval and early modern levitators.
I've interviewed Carlos Iyer, the author of that book.
Oh, I've got to get Carlos Iyer on my show. I'd love to do that. That's such fun. I'm going to listen to your interview, and I'm going to get him on my show because he has to come on my show. Anyway, it's a wonderful book because he never says it's real. He simply lays out, tells the story, and it becomes overwhelmingly obvious that these people weren't a bunch of idiots. They were seeing this. It was happening. Now fast forward to modern times, and I happen to have a friend, and you may have come across him in life, Paul Eno. Paul was a paranormal investigator and lived in the Northeast, and I interviewed him on Dreamland from time to time, and we were friends off and on. And Paul tells the story, and he told it on Dreamland, in fact, of a time when he was a novice in a Catholic religious order. And he was assigned to the local, to a priest who was the local exorcist. And he went, when they did an exorcism, his job was to go and assist. And it became necessary that they had been called to do an exorcism at a mental institution of a young girl who was just a teenager, who was schizophrenic and a drug addict. Mm-hmm. And her parents were desperate because how hard that must be. It's hard to think. And she would be, they had her sitting in a chair. They'd asked for an exorcism. There was a psychiatrist there, a couple of orderlies there, Paul, the other exorcist, other assistant, and the exorcist, and the young woman was sitting in a wheelchair. During the exorcism, she rose up out of the wheelchair, still in the sitting position, floating in the air before all their eyes. The exorcist quietly said, "Just push her back down, please." And Paul put his hand on her leg and pushed her down. And he felt two things. One, she was literally lighter than air. She was, including her clothing. And he felt a kind of electricity going into his hand. I have felt that electricity many times, because when the Greys touch you, you feel that electricity. It's like a gift. It's really a good feeling. Unless they get excited, in which case it can be completely freeze you. I mean, you can't move a muscle. It can be rather shocking. It's one thing to be side by side with something that weird and highly intelligent, and then find out that it's completely immobilized you. I've been in that state, and it's something you have to work to get used to. In any case, the point is this: she levitated. Why? Why did the levitators, Joseph of Cupertino, who levitated in front of the Pope in an audience full of people, hundreds of people, he was a religious ecstatic, and he was taken to see the Pope because what he did in his life was so extraordinary. And he was just in a rapture of religious ecstasy before the Pope. He knelt down to kiss his feet and instead went flying up into the rafters in the audience room. I would love to have seen that. They all saw it. It happened. The Pope said afterwards, if he dies before I do, I'm going to canonize that man. And there are so many stories like that. So what was happening? It's quite clear what was happening in the Middle Ages. These people were all religious ecstatics, and their religious ecstasy was so intense, it overcame something that developed in the human being during the Younger Dryas, the ego. The ego is our method of interacting with each other through voice. That's what it is. And we all have personalities and we all have egos. If you look at the visitors, you find that the older ones can be very wrinkled, of the tall ones who are biological, but they don't have complexity in their faces like you and I do, because they don't really have egos like we do. They have structures that enable them to function as separate individuals, but not identities like we have. Those identities came when the human species was reduced to just a very small number of beings living in a place where every day and every night the sky was filled with flashing lights as these bolides hit the sun. The sea levels had risen 400 feet overnight. The continent, North American continent, had burned down, followed by a 1,000-year flood, which had hung over the whole center of the continent for 1,000 years, only very slowly as the last parts of the glacier melted, draining into the Gulf of Mexico, leaving the black mat. They lived in this. The shock was so great that each person became an individual alone, clawing for survival. That is where the ego was born, in that agony. In that agony. And where we lost what we now remember as the siddhis, and the Catholics as the chrisms, those same abilities that our visitors never lost. Because most planets aren't like Earth. Most planets are much more stable. There's long periods of stability. And this is not true here on Earth. Our planet is a wild angel. A wild angel. And we suffer the consequences of that. And also the benefits. Because we're wild angels too. And that's another reason they want us in their lives, because we're wild angels and they're tame and they want the excitement.
Whitley Strieber, once again, an enlightening experience, a joyful experience, a puzzling experience to be with you. and always a welcome experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I leave you with my wife's words. Have joy.
Whitley, you certainly convey that. And I am the happy recipient of the joy that is emanating from you.
It was a delight, as always, really a delight.
Thank you, Whitley. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download a free PDF copy of issue number 8 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine, or order a beautiful printed copy. Go to newthinkingaloud.org